And we're live. It is Monday, October 20th, 2025. It is 8 o'clock p.m., and you are watching Lawfare Live. I am here with Anna Bauer, Lawfare Senior Editor. I'm Benjamin Wittes, Editor-in-Chief of Lawfare. And Anna, you've had quite a week.
Yeah, it's been a week.
Um, and so if you are watching this, you probably know that the reason it has been a week is that Anna has been texting with the one and only Lindsey Halligan, who uh, approached you apropos of nothing last Saturday. So let's just start at the beginning. How did your correspondence with Lindsey Halligan begin?
Yeah, so it was a Saturday afternoon, around 1:20. It was one of those rare days when I actually was taking some time off and I'd been kind of reading the news, tweeting a little bit. I was doing some tweeting and catching up on the Letitia James indictment, which had just been handed up, on Thursday. And of course, the prosecutor handling it is Lindsey Halligan, the top prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia. And as I'm sitting there, about to take a break and watch some TV, I get a Signal DM request from someone who is calling themselves Lindsey Halligan. Now, Ben, I don't know about you, but it's not every day that I get messages on Signal unsolicited from the top prosecutor in Virginia who the president seems to have installed to prosecute some of his perceived political enemies. But for me, that was very surprising. I thought it was a hoax at first. I assumed that it was not the real Lindsey Halligan because on Signal, you don't necessarily see someone's phone number. You can
On the
call your,
internet, nobody knows you're a dog, and on
yeah,
Signal, nobody knows if you're really Lindsay Halligan or not.
no one knows who you really are. So, but what I did know is that I had met Lindsey Halligan about 3 years ago when I first started covering the Trump criminal cases at the time for Lawfare. I had gone to a hearing in West Palm Beach before Judge Eileen Cannon. For folks who are the real nerds who are listening, you might remember the special master hearing before Judge Cannon, which was over documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago during the FBI's search there. And I went to dinner that night and happened to run into Lindsey Halligan and Jim Trusty, who were on Trump's legal team at the time. So I introduced myself to them. We briefly chatted. Years later, when this supposed Lindsey Halligan person got in touch with me, I thought, oh, that's something that maybe the real Lindsey Halligan would remember, and that's a way I could authenticate or at least get a good sense of whether or not I'm dealing with someone who is a real person here. And so I asked, where did we first meet? And immediately the person on the other end responded, and said the correct answer of who they were with, where we met. And so that gave me a sense that, oh, maybe I really am dealing with the real Lindsey Halligan here. And so we started talking. And it turns out that what she wanted to talk about was some tweets that I'd posted about an hour before, that were about the Letitia James case. It was about a New York Times article that was about grand jury testimony in the Letitia James case. And I had summarized, that testimony in a tweet. And then Lindsey Halligan was apparently not too happy with some of the tweets and the way that I summarized that testimony as reported by the New York Times.
All right, so there's so much here that I don't quite know where to start. But let's start with something you just said at the end, which is that she approached you because she didn't like it wasn't reporting you'd done. It was your tweets about the New York Times's story about the Letitia James grand jury testimony. Did she approach the New York Times to complain about the story?
Yeah, Ben, look, there's a few really unusual things about this whole interaction. And in other circumstances, the pure fact of a prosecutor approaching a reporter or initiating a conversation on Signal isn't necessarily unusual, right? That kind of thing happens. But one of the first things that was really unusual about this is that, as you mentioned, it wasn't even my own reporting that she was approaching me about. It was tweets that I'd posted about someone else's reporting, specifically the New York Times' reporting of this grand jury testimony. So that's one of the really strange elements here. She was clearly not pleased with what I had tweeted. One of them was pure summary. And then another one, which the one she seemed to be focused on was the summary one, but then also it's possible she was focused on a different one that was kind of more of an analytical point, in which I, said, I think that this testimony is would, something to the effect of would tend to be exculpatory for Letitia James because it shows that one of the central claims in the indictment, may not be as alleged, which was that she intended to use the home as a rental investment property, as the indictment puts it, as opposed to what she said she was using for, which was a second home. I thought that the testimony, as reported by the New York Times, which was about her niece testifying that she'd lived there for many years and did not pay rent, I thought that kind of undermined the idea that Letitia James was primarily using this to collect rent money. And look, I'm a reporter, but also a legal analyst, so I make these kinds of points about other people's reporting and how they may affect the legal case all the time. So I just didn't think anything of it. The second thing, in addition to the fact that this was about someone else's reporting, that I'll mention that was unusual is that the story for the New York Times I was tweeting about and that I was really focused on was about grand jury testimony. And it's quite unusual for a prosecutor to even get anywhere near conversations around grand jury matters because of various policies and laws that prohibit the disclosure by a prosecutor of grand jury matters. Oh, you're muted, I think.
There's another unusual thing, which is normally it's one thing if, a prosecutor and a reporter have a pre-existing relationship,
Yeah.
or if you're talking about a policy matter. I mean, senior Justice Department lawyers and reporters talk all the time about policy questions, about internal Justice Department infighting or disputes. Nobody would think twice about her, say, texting you about her battles with Todd Blanche, for example.
Right.
But
Whereas this was about an ongoing prosecution.
this is about a specific, it's about a specific case. It's about somebody else's reporting about a specific case. Um, did she ever tell you what the New York Times supposedly got wrong and why she was talking to you about it?
No, so she approached me and is objecting to something that I have said in this tweet in which I'm summarizing this New York Times reporting. Um Ben, it's a complicated thing to parse, but I will say that it's not clear to me exactly what she was saying was wrong. I have a few maybe ideas of what it could be about, though. It seemed to me that she was responding in some way to the summary of the grand jury testimony, which was that the niece said she had lived at the home for many years without paying rent. She points me at one point to the indictment and says, you should look at the indictment. It says that Letitia James reported thousands of dollars in rental income on our tax forms. That's what she was alluding to in the indictment. And so that seemed to me to be a way of directly responding to the what I had summarized in the tweet. Beyond that, though, I'm frankly not entirely sure what she was trying to tell me. I kept following up to say what specifically is wrong, because if it is wrong, like, because look, if it is wrong, I am happy to fix it. We all care about accuracy. Whenever I make a mistake on something, even if it's like a typo, I will, I get so mad at myself. And I would have been happy to correct it, but she never told me what it was that was wrong. And so that was strange.
And it was never,
Um,
I gotta say, it was never clear to me from reading the texts whether she was upset at you about some factual matter that she thought the New York Times had gotten wrong, or whether she was upset at you because you had described it as an analytical matter as exculpatory, right? There's a there's an ambiguity to me as to whether she was upset at you about a factual question or whether she was upset at you about your characterization of it.
I mean, I think that maybe that's right. I will say though, I did directly ask her at one point. I said, I made it clear I was basing my tweet off of what the New York Times reported. Did they get something wrong? And she responds, yes, but you went with it without fact checking anything. So I took it to be a fact that she was quibbling in some way with the factual assertions that were being made as opposed to analytical assertions. But then you're right, like she does at times kind of more broadly seem to refer to my reporting and say that I am in particular, just really off, and my credibility is going to be on the line because the evidence is going to come out and prove me wrong.
Right.
Which, like, that may be like, I'm very clear that I don't know everything in this case, but part of a prosecutor's role is to communicate to the public, sometimes through an indictment, through something like a speaking indictment, maybe when you have a high profile case that's against a public official like Letitia James. To me, looking at the indictment, it's really hard to have much confidence in the case that was built because it just doesn't tell you much. And there's a lot of public evidence that very much suggests that it is not a particularly strong case.
All right, so let's talk about how you verified that this was Letitia James and not, say, some rando pretending to be Letitia James. Let's go through a little bit the forensic process. You described step one, which was giving her effectively a challenge question and trying to demand that she identify the circumstance in which you and she had met. That got us through most of the week in the sense that we were then working on the assumption that we were actually dealing with Letitia James. But it's not really good enough to go to press with, right? Because I don't know, the Russians could have hacked her email and posed as her, right? And maybe from the emails known about her one interaction with you. How did you nail down that this was actually Letitia James?
Yeah, so the way that we nailed down that it was Lindsey Halligan is that we got her phone number through independent means.
I'm
And
sorry,
whenever
I
you
just
add
said, how
it,
did we
no,
know that this was
it's
Letitia
okay.
James?
I,
How
I
did you
knew
know?
exactly what you were talking about
I
there, sir.
know, but
You're fine.
as you do, Anna, when I make a mistake, I like to correct it. How did we know that this was Lindsey Halligan?
Yeah. So the way that we knew that this is Lindsey Halligan is that we obtained her phone number, her real phone number, not just, Signal username or whatever. And I put it in my phone contacts. And for people who are familiar with Signal, which is a application for messaging, that journalists often use to communicate with their sources. It has a function where you can, for example, set disappearing messages, which notably is one of the things that Lindsey Halligan did here immediately when we started the conversation. But with Signal, people can reach out to you through a username. You don't exactly know if it's linked to their phone number, but if you get their phone number and put it in your phone, and then you go back to your messaging and you have an existing conversation with them, it'll then show their phone number, associated with that conversation. And so that's exactly what we did here. Where we got her phone number, I put it in my phone, went back to our existing conversation, and suddenly her phone number showed up. So we were very confident that by the time we were ready to publish the story, that it really was Lindsey Halligan.
So there were two more pieces of evidence that cropped up today in response to your approach to the Justice Department. The first is that the Justice Department confirmed it. And if you look at the Justice Department statement, they acknowledge that that this is an exchange between you and Lindsey Halligan. And the second is that shortly after you sent that, the Lindsey Halligan who had been ghosting you for the last several days, that thread suddenly came alive, and so you sent an email to the United States Department of Justice, and you got a response on this Signal thread from Lindsey Halligan, which is pretty conclusive. So, what did Lindsey Halligan say when she, rose from obscurity to chat with you again?
Yeah, so I guess this kind of brings me back to one of the other surprising things about this conversation that we missed earlier when we were discussing, which is that the whole of this conversation, the entirety of it, after she approached me, she never even attempted to have a discussion about the basis on which we were speaking. And what I mean by that is that, for people who are used to engaging with the media, as Lindsey Halligan surely is. She was on Trump's criminal defense team for several years. She was his personal lawyer. I believe she has a degree in broadcast journalism. She beyond that, worked in the White House. And then now is one of the most high profile prosecutors in the country. You really like, look, I don't know, but I would find it really surprising beyond belief if Lindsey Halligan is not aware of how media relationships work. And usually the rule is that, if you want to talk off the record, which means that you want to talk in a way that is confidential so that the reporter doesn't use your name, doesn't use the information in their story, then you say, hey, is it okay if we talk off the record? There are different variations of this. On background means you can talk, but they can't like specifically use your name, although they can allude to or use the information. Regardless, the rule is you have to have an agreement. Everyone who works in this space knows this. For sophisticated media engagement, people know this. And yet Lindsey Halligan never had a discussion with me about it. So we were on the record as far as I was concerned. And then we, are about to publish this story. We get a response from the Justice Department. Then we get Lindsey Halligan, who reinitiates our Signal conversation after several days of silence. And she says, by the way, everything that I said was off the record. And that is just simply not how it works, Ben. You and I both know that very well. You don't get to retroactively say that something was off the record. You have to have an agreement with the journalist. And so, I said, I'm sorry, that's not how this works. And she continued to insist that things were off the record. At one point she said, it was obvious that it was off the record. It was on Signal and disappearing messages were set.
Which is, by
You,
the way, a very weird thing to say because it's citing evidence. I mean, Justice Department officials are not supposed to be doing business on Signal, which is not allowed on Justice Department devices, as far as I know. And you're not supposed to be doing business on your personal device, government business on your personal devices, and you're not supposed to be, using disappearing messages, which are, these are government records that you're supposed to be retaining. And so she's using evidence of, hey, look, I'm using Signal, which I'm not supposed to be doing, and I'm using disappearing messages, which I'm not supposed to be using, as evidence that you were off the record, which is not the way it works. Um, so here's my question about this, and I, uh, some people look at this and say, "Hey, wait a minute, uh, did Anna Bauer burn a source here?" And I just want to say, so I have supervised this reporting from minutes after you first got a text message from her. Um, and I was um, shocked that she never said a word about what basis you were talking on. Um, and so I could only think of a couple things that uh, are could mitigate it from her point of view. One is if she knew you really well and there were an assumption, sometimes you have a relationship with somebody and the relationship is deep enough and there's enough trust that you just can kind of assume that that person isn't going to use it. And then so you forget. Do you know Lindsey Halligan well enough for her to make an assumption that she could just assume you're off the record?
No, I mean, I want to be very clear about this because and I haven't not even looked at the reaction to the story yet, but just in case there are people who are wondering, like, oh, did they have some kind of off the record relationship that, isn't being disclosed here or something? No, quite literally the only time I've ever spoken to Lindsey Halligan in my life was the time I ran into her in the restaurant 3 years ago.
So this is like
Um,
you run into somebody in a restaurant and then 3 years later you text them sensitive stuff out of nowhere, um, and you expect confidentiality.
Yeah, and you're the most high profile prosecutor in the country who is already the subject of immense scrutiny. You know that there are, at least in the case against Comey, we weren't talking about that case here, but in that case, you already know there's selective and vindictive prosecution motions that are on their way. I believe that those were due today, although I haven't had a chance to look at them yet. And you probably think it's very likely that that's going to happen in the Letitia James case too. And there are reasons, Ben, why prosecutors are really hesitant to make public comments about ongoing prosecutions because already of the reasons we've stated, but there are things like, pretrial publicity motions or, a variety of other ways that defense counsel can use these kinds of missteps and incidents as ammo. And if you're already the subject of much criticism, that kind of thing, and that the defense is looking for whatever they can to put into those kinds of motions, then you would think you'd be especially careful, and that's just not what happened here.
Yeah, so you and I, after a draft of this was completed, um, one of our editors read it and said, how do we know that this kind of communication isn't actually much more common than we understand? And I kind of had an intuitive sense, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never heard of an interaction like this. I've never met a prosecutor who's just, described having such a interaction. I've never met or described anybody else having such an interaction. I've never heard a journalist talk about a prosecutor people get reps, right? This person's really forward leaning and press stuff. Never heard of somebody doing something like this. But we decided, okay, let's spend the weekend talking to people on both sides of this relationship and just get a sense of, we're not going to talk about who we spoke to, but we talked to a fair diversity of people on both the prosecutorial and the Justice Department reporting side of the thing. Fair to say that nobody could cite an example of something like this, right?
No, no one could cite an example of something like this. And of course, everyone like we have been, everyone pointed out as far or a lot of people that we spoke to pointed out things like, oh, well, yeah, that contacts between prosecutors and reporters do happen. You and I both know that. And as you pointed out, there's
I have met people as a reporter who are deeply involved in lawfare today, and I met them when they were prosecutors.
yeah,
And I don't think there was anything inappropriate about those contacts, either from the prosecutorial side as a journalist side. It is proper for there to be contacts. It is not proper or normal for there to be contacts on active investigative matters outside of the normal. I mean, what the propriety line is, you can debate, but there's a caution about stuff that involves pending cases, active matters, grand juries, things that implicate investigative or privacy equities.
Yeah, exactly. And no one that we spoke to could point to a similar example or having heard of something like this or having experienced something like this. I will add too that in the time since we've published the story, I've gotten feedback from other legal journalists, other former officials who we didn't speak to in advance of publishing the story, who also had the reaction of, wow. And I asked them, have you ever seen anything like this? And they're like, no, this is wild, so that's kind of the gist of, obviously, it varies people's reactions, but the gist of it is that people have not seen something like this. I certainly had not before now.
One more question and then we'll let you go. So one of the weird things about this interaction is this uh, sense that on her part, which seems to go back to your first meeting, that you kind of have to sit there while she whines about your integrity as a journalist. Like she doesn't like the way you covered the stuff with her and Jim Trusty in Florida, and she doesn't like your tweets. She really doesn't seem to like you very much, Anna. I hope that doesn't bother you too much. Um, why? But yet she feels sort of intimate enough with you or connected enough to reach out. And so I'm just curious for your sense of what she thinks your relationship is.
Ben, I have honestly have no idea. I mean, yeah, I don't want to over, speculate or psychoanalyze. So I honestly have no idea. I just can't speak to it.
I mean, she says at one point in the thing, yeah, the New York Times got it wrong, but I expect that of them. I didn't expect it of you. It's the first, like, she's never said a nice thing about you in any, or to you. Like, where did this expectation come from?
frankly, again, I don't know. I mean, look, like I think she had just joined the Trump criminal team around the time that I started reporting on those cases. We're both 30 something year old women who have kind of are in these, like, I mean, very different, thrown into extraordinary circumstances, kind of thing. She joins the former president's criminal team. I'm covering it. Maybe there was some, again, this all just feels so speculative that it's, I have no idea. But maybe there's just something of, it's someone that you've met, although briefly, you feel while you're in this situation that you've been thrust into, that it's someone that you want to reach out to for some reason. I really can't speak to it. I don't know. But what I will say is that I think it's interesting because at times she seemed to suggest that expected a lot of me or a lot more of me, but then at other
Expected more of
times
you, Anna. You've
she but then
disappointed her.
but then at other times it was really unclear to me if she had ever even read what kind of reporting I do, because my reporting is not access based. I'm not a reporter who's really trying to get the access based scoop or whatever. That's just not the core of my work, although it is sometimes a part of my work where I talk to sources and get information. But really, I'm going to court and reporting on the proceedings, and a lot of my work is based on public records and documents. And it seemed to me that at one point she encouraged me to outcompete other media outlets, find my own sources. But that suggests to me that there's not really much of an understanding of what kind of reporting and work I actually do. And then she came back around and said that I'm not in fact a journalist. So
Right.
I don't know. We'll see. Maybe one day Lindsey Halligan and I will sit down for an off the record conversation and
And
we'll find out.
well, so the last line of your piece in the epilogue is that you're going to text her a link to the story. Have you done that yet?
I have not. I'm going to do it right now whenever we get off of this phone call.
We're going to do that right now, Anna. It's been a long week. Get some rest uh, and if Lindsey Halligan sends you any thoughts on the piece, uh, you know, make sure she knows what basis she